Jerry Duggan and Juan Frigeri deepen the conspiracy around Tony Stark as Ironheart comes in to help Tony deal with the living laser, who believes Tony is the one responsible for his recent imprisonment. Jerry Duggan continues to build out his plot against Tony Stark, revealing there is indeed some larger conspiracy at play around the hero, tying it to classical Iron Man villains like the Living Laser, while also bringing in elements not just from Chris Cantwell's run, but also things Dan Slott did in his series before Cantwell's, really adding a fantastic sense of continuity to the last couple of runs. Tony teaming with Ironheart and continuing the Ten Rings plot from Cantwell's book was a lot of fun, as well as I liked how Riri is actively trying to use the rings in interesting new ways, not just using them as sort of like a weapon, but using them in a way to defeat villains without resorting to large-scale destruction and violence. The threat to Tony is also a very interesting one, as it has all the hallmarks of a classic Iron Man plot, with someone trying to take his company or trying to take his money or armor, but as Tony puts it, the way it's being done doesn't fit with his villain's MOs. And not only that, it's a villain who isn't afraid to play dirty, attacking Tony even at his Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, a place that he assumed he would feel safe in. And I like that Tony actually goes through a fact that he is enraged the idea that someone has infiltrated his meeting there and poisoned him and kind of took that away from him. I thought that was quite an interesting way to take the character. Juan Frigeri delivers some fantastic looking artwork for the issue, making Living Laser's power look visually interesting, but the final 2 pages revealing the fate of Tony's ace up his gauntlet were my favourite, visually signposting the consequences of what happens when you become friends with Tony Stark. The Invincible Iron Man issue 2 was another fantastic pin on the conspiracy board Jerry Duggan and Juan Frigeri are placing around Tony Stark, building in great ties to past runs along with some fun classic Iron Man villains. I'm going to give this issue a 9 out of 10. The Invincible Iron Man issue 2 finds the sick Tony Stark found by Ironheart, who didn't expect to see his drunken incident be the #1 thing on TikTok that night. Tony has no idea what any of that is as he is picked up and taken from the crowd. Riri tells him that no good thing comes from being the internet's main character, telling him that his heart is arrhythmic so she needs to get him to a hospital. Tony doesn't want that, wanting to be taken to his armor, so Riri takes him to his garage, telling Tony that she won't talk to him about the Mandarin rings. Tony only wants to make sure she knows what she is doing with them, since it's gone badly for those who've weared them in the past. Tony puts on his armor chest piece, wanting Boss to check out his heart and activate his pacemaker. The suit finds that there is a toxin in his bloodstream and he should go to the hospital, but Tony tells the armor to be quiet and give him and Riri a moment of privacy. Riri is shown around the new home of Iron Man as Tony tells her that he could look after the rings in his warehouse with the other Doomsday weapons he collected from Source Control. Riri again refuses, but assures Tony that they are in the safest place they can possibly be. She tells Tony that the world thinks he fell off the wagon tonight, hoping that he's planning on correcting that, but Tony only wants to sleep. Elsewhere, a being watches the news explode about Tony's supposed bender, which in turn is beginning to affect the lawsuit brought against Stark for his lab exploding in a residential neighborhood. Andy Bung, the CEO of Stark Unlimited, addresses the reporters, assuring them that Tony has no affiliation with the company anymore and he is retired, as the being watching finds the series of events much more fun than he had hoped. As Andy continues his press conference, the Living Laser blows through the wall, demanding to know where his jailer, Tony Stark, is. Tony and Riri both watch as the Living Laser appears at the conference, and Tony knows that he's going to get the blame for this as well, trying to get out of his hammock but he can't, feeling the toxin coursing through his veins. Tony gets Riri to help him into his armor, suiting up and heading to Avengers Mansion, which Ironheart knows is now a theme hotel. Tony notes that with all of the civilians around, he doesn't want to make the news anymore. Living Laser meanwhile melts the Iron Man statue in the Avengers Mansion park, making Tony quip how he doesn't have a lot of statues. Ironheart knows that that was his only one, as Living Laser demands to know what Tony was doing with him. Iron Man has no idea what Arthur is talking about, wanting to discuss it since someone is gunning for him and Living Laser is being caught up in it. The villain unleashes his lasers, blowing through Iron Man's shields, telling Tony that caught up is something a guy who captured and experimented on him would say. Iron Man hits Living Laser, demanding that he stop this before he kills someone, and the villain knows that that's what he's aiming to do, never taking him for a mad scientist. scientist, but maybe with all of the money and power, Tony just went crazy. The hero and villain's lasers meet each other, but Tony is blown back by the force of them, allowing Living Laser to blast his arc reactor and destroy it before cutting off a piece of his mask, wondering if Tony was hoping to add his power to his suit, but he won't have to now. Tony wants Arthur to stop and use his words, but the villain would rather use his lasers. Tony tries to get the armor's weapons to activate, but the suit's low power stops it from happening, making Tony wonder if ordering Postmates might help entice negotiations with the villain. He tells Arthur that he is being framed and whoever is doing this is using Living Laser. Ironheart appears, kneeing Arthur in the chest before blocking his lasers, but they cut through her armor. She decides it's time for the gloves to come off, removing her armor to reveal that she has the 10 rings on. Riri uses the 10 rings to make Living Laser stop attacking, telling Tony that she is hacking into his mind. Tony thinks that Riri lied to him, but she knows she didn't. She said the rings were safe, and they are, and she is now using them to enter Arthur's mind to see what exactly happened to him. Riri sees Arthur was crashing at an empty penthouse owned by some money launderers when there was a knock at the door. Arthur finds Tony on the other side of the door, before he is tasered and his goons sedate and transport him to a secret lab. Tony knows he doesn't have goons and Riri knows he doesn't since he can't afford them. She knows that they are both right though, and Tony Stark did kidnap Arthur and run experiments on him, just not this Tony. Tony thinks that there is an LMD or something at play here as Arthur asks why he was dragged into this. Tony becomes frustrated, telling the villain that since everything he did he knew would happen thanks to Arthur being predictable. Ironheart separates the angry men, using her rings to repair the Avengers statue, but Living Laser suddenly attacks them, using the opportunity to escape from the heroes, telling them that when they find out who did this, he wants in their death. Riri gets her armor back as Tony wonders if the villain just shot at them, then requested a team up. Riri thinks that it shows personal growth in Living Laser, wondering if Tony wants to chase him or head back to his garage. Later on, Tony tells Riri that she should keep her distance, at least publicly, from him until they know what they are dealing with. She asks how Tony was poisoned, so he thinks it happened at his AA meeting when someone made him a coffee. Tony never expected the people from his Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to try and kill him, and that makes him really angry. He thinks this is all about Stark Unlimited's stock price falling, but none of his old enemies fit the bill, especially when most of them are dead. Ironheart hopes that he will call when he needs her, and Tony thanks her, looking forward to meeting his next dead nemesis. Tony continues his autobiography recordings, knowing that he has an ace up his gauntlet that no one knows about, a living poison pill against hostile takeovers from his company. Tony thinks of Zhong Wei, who didn't want anything to do with him when Tony lobbied to put him on the board of his first company, and he was on the board to challenge the CEO, which oftentimes was Tony himself, and Tony is glad he did that. Tony knows that he liked Wei since he was a self-made man with a good heart. Wei Mimol has been killed, a hole blown through his chest, as Tony knows that as long as Wei is safe and sound on the board, he's got nothing to worry about.